doing a lot to make sure that we take Grainger's understanding of our business, our customers' context, our product context, our operational elements, and bring them to life in every way in which a customer interacts with us.
Hi, I'm Ben, founder CEO at Proton AI, the AI-powered CRM built specifically for distributors. And you're listening to In the Mind of a Distributor, where we interview the smartest minds in distribution. Let's get into it. Brian, thanks so much for being here. Really excited to have you on the podcast. The first time we're ever recording it in person.
Excellent.
So,
happy to do it.
Yeah, really happy to have you. Just getting started, would love to hear more about sort of your journey into distribution. Obviously, you're Chief Product Officer at Grainger, which is an amazing spot to be, an amazing company to be at. How did you get here?
Sometimes I talk about having a Forrest Gumpian sort of luck to my career. And what I mean by that is that nobody ever sets out to actually go into industrial supply. No, I've never met somebody that said, you know what I want to be when I grow up? Somebody that's really entrenched in industrial distribution. So it was a bunch of serendipity. I went to a college in Connecticut, Wesleyan, and a company called McMaster Carr found me. And 7 years later, I was leaving that company and off to Grainger. And I've had good fortune and the opportunity to see it from multiple geographies and in multiple contexts. Because of that, I would say it prepared me on some level to be the Chief Product Officer at Grainger, which I'm lucky enough to do now.
So what was the moment when you fell in love with selling nuts and bolts? I mean, what was there a specific moment? As you said, I mean, no kid sort of wakes up dreaming of that, but when did you realize this is really what I'm interested in?
I really liked economics. And, in high school, I took AP economics and I had a facility for math, and at Wesleyan, I furthered that. And so, I never set out for industrial distribution, but all of the education that I had had, or a lot of it anyway, was into understanding markets, understanding, pricing, understanding supply, understanding demand. I studied widgets for many years, and now I'm at a company that sells them. And so there was just a natural sort of link to the education that I really liked and the business that I found myself in. And so it always felt very natural.
And how did you end up in product? Like, most distributors don't have a chief product officer. So can you just quickly explain what it means to be sort of in charge of product and how you ended up in that specific role?
I read a book around being a CIO, and it was called Be the Business, which is a little aspirational. And the spirit of that book, which was written by a recruiter, said you sort of have to be technical enough to understand all the applications, all the data movement, all the cyber, every element that a CIO needs to manage. But they also need to know the business deeply enough. And, when you talk about the understanding the business deeply enough, it's not only the strategy or the operating model that you use to sort of create value in any given department every day. It's, understanding what is differentiating, how the competitors line up end to end. And that's a lot to cover for any CIO. And so I think one of the things that we've discovered is that, by bringing in people with very different expertise, and there is a CTO, and he manages more of the traditional technical side, and my role is to sort of manage the product side, or the how we prioritize our investments, how we shape our investments, how the operations need to evolve, how our technology needs to evolve. We have found that having two people do those two tasks serve us better, and so it's helped with our transformation.
I'm curious, sort of make that more concrete in terms of what decisions are owned by sort of each role, just so people can understand.
I would not say that the decisions are owned. What I would say is that the CTO, Johnny Leroy, and I work very closely together. So the functions that are generally on my side are the product managers, UX, and this has evolved, but product managers, UX, our testing platform, and our portfolio managers. And so the portfolio managers are generally the folks that are taking requests from the business to evolve some part of our tech for whatever reasons, usually a purchase software application. Product managers are building their own software. UX is helping on every side, but principally on the product side. And our analytics platform is making sure that the stuff that we're developing is actually creating value and managing it. So that's my responsibility.
Yeah.
Johnny's responsibility is architecture, our security, our organization, product engineering, infrastructure, operations.
So do you think in 10 years, more distributors will have this sort of split? I mean, in software, it's super common, right? We have a CTO and a head of product, and there's a healthy tension there, and they work together in the way that you're describing.
Yeah.
It's an uncommon pattern, though.
Yeah, I think it's easier for, what's called a digital native, sort of an Amazonian orientation or a Google orientation, to adopt what is considered a traditional one in that space.
Yeah.
I don't know. I look across the competitive landscape. I'm obviously pretty familiar with McMaster Carr, having worked there in the past. And when I did, this idea of a product manager didn't really exist. I don't know how this all plays out. I think companies would be well served to have that orientation, because I think the world is growing increasingly digital, especially as we move into this new world of AI. So I think it is a paradigm to study.
I want to pivot and talk about merchandising, which I think is a really important lever, at least from what you've shared and sort of what Grainger talks about as being a really important growth lever. I'm curious, like, how does Grainger approach merchandising, think about merchandising, and think about it as a differentiator?
So in general, what I'd say about merchandising strategy is you have to think about the customer's context first, and then how that maps onto their needs, and then what products to sell and in what size and what price, and whether or not the brand that you're leveraging is worthwhile and meaningful to our customer in that way. And as you traverse all of those decisions, you sort of work your way into, do I need laddered strategies like good, better, best, or do I need a single offering? And they all play into it.
How does this play out from a sort of like bottoms up versus top down perspective? Like what you described is a very strategic approach to figuring out what products do we stock, and they meet some sort of criteria and we sort of figure that out.
And probably more bottoms up there.
But the other side of it is like the customer calls and says, I need a valve that has these properties and you guys don't have it.
That's right.
And someone sources it.
That's right. And so there is a sourcing group. That sourcing group is a rich ground for us to sort of source ideas. And so one of the things that's been important for us is how do we take the signals that we get from our existing customer base that is already valuable and they're placing these orders for sourcing, and then build some additional momentum in terms of what products we should offer. Yesterday, I was meeting with the organization in Boston that manages the tea, and they were talking about a need for chainsaw clothing. And Grainger had a certain number of it, but not all of it. And so then we sort of did some diligence, looked into our sourcing files, found out that we have a signal there, and we're going to be adding to our assortment to help our customers navigate that context, which will be useful in sort of a forestry industry, which is not normally our highest leverage segment, but transportation often is, and providing services to the government. And turns out when you are clearing pathways for trains, for mass transit, this kind of equipment is often needed. And so it's that kind of opportunity where you talk to your customer, you see the kinds of needs that they have, and you investigate, you build out your assortment to help them be more successful and need fewer sources.
And how does that play when you think about sort of the core business, which has 2 million SKUs versus a Zoro, which has a sort of like endless assortment? Do the two talk together? Is there products that you don't want to sort of bring into the core business, but the customer wants? I'm curious through how they.
Yes, we're talking about that sort of more and more. But in general, those businesses are run fairly distinctly.
Yep.
We will pay attention to what Zoro's getting traction with and consider it for a Grainger offering, but often they're servicing a different buyer entirely.
And how do you think about the role of brand? So, there are some products that have a really strong brand that Grainger sells, and there are others where, if you go on the e-commerce site, it's a little hard to figure out exactly where the product comes from a brand perspective. I'm curious how you think about that from a merchandise perspective.
There are lots of interesting dynamics across the industry. Grainger and a lot of others take a different orientation because there is brand loyalty and customers know what brand they're going to be buying. There's often a greater sense of security and satisfaction, and they understand it. But then you enter into games around pricing and how you navigate that competitive set. And so if you take on the branding the product, you're going to be ready for making sure that your market pricing is as tight as it needs to be.
So with 2 million products, how do you make it easy for customers to find what they're looking for and for sales reps to find what they're looking for?
So, it's all about a version of how do you compete. And for Grainger, we want to make sure that we're adding the right products and they are really easy to find. And so one of the first steps that we take is making sure that our merchandising organization is expert in the products that they manage. It's in the magic of really understanding and paying attention, and it's in the magic of collecting the right information and then harmonizing it not only for the products that you're trying to sell, but across that related product set to make sure that you understand what product is necessary and what use case.
Yep.
And so a lot of what has been happening on Grainger.com and in general is understanding what makes products different from each other.
Yep.
And helping customers navigate those differences so that they understand not only given their industry, what product should they be buying, but what particular problem they're solving.
Yep.
Giving them additional clues about what might work for them.
What's the role of AI in merchandising now and
evolving? Isn't it fun? There's so many different ways and so many different means to sort of understand products and how they are developed and what makes them unique or what makes them useful. And we're using AI probably like everybody else. We're looking at our standard work. We're looking at how to accelerate it, and large language models can play a very big role in that. When we started thinking about pulling market signals, about products that we should be adding to our assortment or how they're functioning, multimodal AI is also going to be a thing. And so, right now when we go into Grainger's inventory management service or our keep stock service, we can take pictures of products, we can take pictures of how they're stored, and that becomes additional types of information that we can process, albeit through computer vision, and start to understand what customers need, where they're buying from, how can we serve them more capably. And we're building an ecosystem where we can sort of leverage AI in a bunch of different contexts in our business, bring it back and enrich our assortment development.
Yep. Yeah, it makes a ton of sense. I mean, it strikes me you guys have just an unbelievable amount of information from the sales team, dead end searches on the website, like you name it. There's
a
lot of data you have about customers. I'm curious how the merchandising strategy differs when you think about an endless assortment model like Zorro versus the sort of very controlled environment that you guys have created sort of in the core business.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say principally is how much you invest per SKU. It would be the biggest difference.
Grainger is obviously an incredible digital business. 36% of the business is web orders, and over 70% of the business is sort of broadly digital. Mm-hmm. Other than being excellent at merchandising products, what are the big sort of drivers of growth of digital?
Yeah, so in general, when you have a digital experience, you will enable the customers to self-serve. And our interest is make self-service or the customer's transaction with Grainger as easy as possible, which often means digital interfaces and connectivity. And so whether it's, Grainger's ePro systems or our Cube Stock services or web, or even how we enable our sales force to transact in the field, we're doing a lot to make sure that we take Grainger's understanding of our business, our customers' context, our product context, our operational elements, and bring them to life in every way in which a customer interacts with us. And so sometimes that just means equipping a salesperson who is talking to a customer and making sure that they understand what we know about that customer, what we know about the products that they're buying, what we know about their services, so that they can have a fluent and healthy conversation and equip them for success. Really, what I would say is we are trying to enable our business digitally to the greatest extent possible, which requires a lot of thought about prioritization, which requires a lot of thought about sort of what does the enterprise data need to look like and why, and how do we make sure that, our experiences not only have the right events logged, but also that there's interoperability between all of our business functions.
What was the thing that most didn't work as you thought about driving digital growth?
Yeah, so, I don't know that things haven't worked because we haven't given up in certain cases, but it's like all software development, it's iterative. When we first embarked, there was a lot of hype around visual search and the potential capability there. And, people don't have to type words anymore, rather they just take a picture. And while we didn't really know how much market traction that would get, because in general, our customers are not early adopters of technology, building out that service helped us on some level convert sort of opportunities into sales. But really what it was a tool internally that we could use to identify products. And
Right.
so if you're in a branch, something drops on the floor, you can figure out what it is pretty quickly. If you're in a keep stock location and a customer is building and you need to identify a product, it's often a handy way for us to identify a product, even if we don't sell it. And so the use case that is about customer conversion may evolve into more internal facing tools. But if you have a good hypothesis about where you're going to start and why it might be valuable and leave yourself some degrees of freedom in your design to use it across other different contexts, you end up improving your opportunity for value creation.
Most sales reps spend 72% of their week on admin tasks instead of actually selling. Proton changes that. We're a CRM built for distributors that guides your reps on who to call and what to sell. Our AI assistant Pronto even gives instant answers to questions like, what do I need to know about this account? Or which product should I pitch them next? Swish nearly tripled their growth rate by using Proton. You could too. Start by visiting proton.ai to learn more. Now back to the show.
I remember when you guys launched visual search.
Yep.
And everyone was freaking out about it. And it doesn't surprise me what you said, which is the customer adoption maybe wasn't there initially.
Yeah.
How do you think that will change as people are using ChatGPT and other sort of large language models that are multimodal? Do you think that will change? And then in what other ways do you think the digital experience will change as people get used to this sort of new interface, new way to interact with technology?
Yeah, it's interesting. The answer is I don't know. It's going to be fun to see and see it play out. I don't think, from a computer vision investment perspective, I don't think we're going to ever regret that investment. Seeing products, seeing what's broken, being able to identify, opportunities for Grainger to help. It's hard to imagine that that's going to be less valuable going forward.
I'm curious how you think digital is going to change with sort of the advent of agentic AI?
Circa, 2014, 2015, we had, ML was still around back then. It wasn't nearly as robust a service as it's turned out to be now. But we were preparing for this day. And the reason we were preparing for it is, we think about our opportunities going forward. We need to know more about our products and our customers than anybody else. And so we've been building data models and really focusing on that with the idea that at some point, as the AI systems and agentic systems start to mature, we'll be well positioned for that wave. And so there's a lot of conjecture about how the world is going to change and what the customer's buying experience is going to be. And, I could tell a science fiction story too. But in general, I think that irrespective of how the world continues to evolve, Grainger's going to be in a good position because we made our investments in data. And, a colleague of mine has said things like, you need to build the right snowflakes so you can build the right snowballs. And what he really means in that is if you decompose your business and the value that you provide and make sure that it's instantiated in a compelling data model, then you can use it in all sorts of new ways. You can reform snowballs, you can build new systems. Having a lot of flexibility around your data and making sure that it is valuable and describes the product as it is or the customer context as it is, gives you a lot of ways and a lot of degrees of freedom to use models in interesting ways or LLMs generally.
To date, it's been a human task to build this, massive data model understanding of 2 million products. And that's been a real competitive advantage for Grainger relative to, the long tail of smaller industrial distributors. If it's not a human task anymore to understand a product and to build a data model like that, how does that change what Grainger's competitive advantage is relative to smaller distributors?
So, it's a good question. We're going to find out. So, we've seen in general, when we use any kind of modern AI, you have often humans in the loop. And then sort of when you think about the human that's in the loop, normally they have the expertise to understand if the model is producing a good output or a bad output and to make a decision or a judgment about which path they ought to choose. I don't think the world is going to move or at least our world is going to move in a direction where expertise is no longer required. I think that experts armed with large language models presents an even more interesting productivity opportunity where we can just get more done with less. I don't see us ever not relying on mastery or expertise. I see our expertise being augmented by large language models and data science.
Makes a ton of sense. When you think about the sales team, the core Grainger business is 4,000 salespeople. How do you think about sort of arming them with the right digital tools to deliver that personalized experience you were talking about?
Again, start with the customer and their context. And so if you are generally a smaller business, maybe more remote business, probability that you're going to be on the phone is higher. When you think about a digital call or you think about a call with a customer, you've got to have the right information that is easily navigable, that is not distracting in the way of the human-to-human interaction, and make sure that that seller, who's really never going to meet that customer, never build an actual human connection that's face-to-face in a traditional way, they can create levels of intimacy in knowing them by making sure the information is well-structured, well-organized, well-presented, and doesn't get in the way of the transaction. And so it's our job to think about the customers, their interfaces with Grainger and making sure, whether it's a call or whether it's a face-to-face sale, and understand the challenges that they have and make sure that we design interfaces that allow that transaction to occur very efficiently. What I would say is to start with the customer, work your way back to the types of information that are going to be useful in creating advantage or a good experience.
What you're describing is a really thoughtful approach to sales rep customer interaction. Did you ever have pushback from sales reps? Oftentimes we'll go out and travel. I've been out traveling with reps in a bunch of different industries, and especially in distribution, it's like sort of a Wild West environment sometimes. And my guess is that on some level you had to sort of fight that to bring this kind of structured process to the sales team.
The only time that we've encountered that has been generally when there's a fear that AI might replace them, or that potentially the types of automation that we're pursuing is going to jeopardize their future in some fashion. And when we sit back and explain, what we're really trying to do, we often get greater adoption. And so what happened to probably most, now we have a digital assistant in our customer service. So if you go onto Grainger.com and start chatting, it's an augmented experience with large language models, still person to person on some level, but it's augmented by some AI that we leverage.
It's a many-to-one experience.
It's a many-to-one experience. And so in general, what happens is the Grainger team member, who might have been nervous initially, starts to see the output. And when they see the output, it's like, I'm sounding like an expert. More often, they have come back and said, this makes me feel more productive. And when they start to see how it can impact their work productively, the adoption starts to come.
Explaining the why.
Yeah, explaining the why and how it's going to change their world and that it's going to make them better as well as the company.
Yeah.
But you have to get over that initial fear.
One of our values at Proton is curiosity. What is one thing after a long career in distribution, obviously tons of expertise, that you are still curious about?
One of the interesting elements of large language models and how they interface with their human clients is, how they position the communication. I mean, a lot of the large language models are becoming addictive because of the way that they interface and the way that they answer and the way that they, engage. And I think it's a really interesting thing to study. In my experience, and I'm ripping this idea off of the Frederick Brooks Mythical Man Month, digital transformation is people transformation. And the most difficult thing in making software is communication. And the more people that you open up to that communication, the more opportunity there is for misunderstanding, bad assumptions, and end-to-end. And so I think that what I'm curious about is how we can communicate with our customers or our team members or our stakeholders or our shareholders in a more interesting way and break down walls or barriers in understanding. I think that communication opportunity is one that I remain curious about because I'm so ineffective with my general communication.
Well, you were great at communicating today, so thanks so much for doing the podcast. Really appreciate it.
Good.
That's it for this episode of In the Mind of a Distributor. If you like this conversation, leave a review. It helps more folks in distribution find the show. If you're thinking about a CRM for your business, head to proton.ai to see how Proton can help you grow faster. Or if you want to connect with me, you can add me, Benj Cohen, on LinkedIn. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.